In this video, I'm going to go over how to work with the draw setup or the draw and setup inside processing. And inside setup, this is something that only runs once. So for example, if I write print ln, this is what prints to a new line inside the terminal, and I say hello, we're going to see this only print once inside the terminal, and then nothing else happens. But if I take this and I move it to draw, we're going to see that this is constantly being written. And this is something, you can see the small bar down here getting lower and lower and lower. So what this means is that draw is a constant loop. No matter what happens, it's going to constantly go over and over and over again, which is great because then we can use it as a way to change something on the screen over time. So for example, if I draw a rectangle at 100, 100 with a scale of 100, 100, we're going to see this on the canvas, right? But say I want this whole shape to move. What I can do is I can use a value in the place of the x value to move it across the screen. So I'm going to create a global variable, which is an integer called x, and I'm going to make this equal to 0. I'm going to put it here, and when I run this, it's going to be stuck on the side of the screen. But say I want this to move, or I want this to have some motion to it. I can update the value of x. So x is now going to be equal to x plus 1. So each time this runs, it's going to be equal to x plus the value of whatever it was in the previous iteration. So under the first time it runs, it's 0. Comes down, we see 0 plus 1. And that way it's going to be 1. Next time it runs, 1 plus 1 equals 2, and so on and so forth. And that is going to move this shape slowly and slowly across the screen. Now we're seeing this trail behind it because the background is only being drawn once inside setup. If we move the background to draw, we will no longer see that line, and we see it steadily moving across the screen. If we want something to go faster, we could then increase the speed. We could even store this variable inside or this number inside a variable. So maybe I want this to be speed. Let's make a variable called int speed. Let's set this to 10. Sometimes it's easier to create a variable to really get it to move across. Now one thing that's interesting is if I print the value of x, x equals, or let's see, print ln, and we print the value of x, we'll see this down here. It's constantly going, and it's still going. It's going out the door, down the street, and it's gone. So one thing you could do is create some if statements to get it to come back onto our screen. So if I say if x is greater than the width, then make x equal to 0. So what this does is it resets our value if we want it to come back on the side of our screen. So let's bring this back here, and maybe we could put this on the screen itself. And so I'm just drawing this to the screen, right in the middle, where it's going to show us the value of x going across. So now we've got it really sort of zooming. And there's some issues with having it go across and not taking into account the overall size of our shape, but for the purposes of this is totally fine. So this is kind of interesting. Now we're getting it to move across the screen, but we're giving it some if statements. We could also think about it changing color as it moves across the screen. So what if I wanted it to change in value? So I could use the value of x to change our color. So if I say fill, and I use the value of x, and let's put this above our rectangle, and this if statement should also go above our rectangle as well. Now we're going to see it sort of change, but what happens is it reaches that scale of the middle by the time it gets to this point, right, 255, and then it just sort of keeps going. It gets too large of a number. So this is where we could use map as a way to change that value of the fill. So if I make a float, I'm going to say float new col for new color equals map the value of x, and since it goes from a scale of 0 to the width of the canvas, I want it to go on a scale from 0 to 255 because that's our color. Our color sort of changed from white to black. So now what's going to happen is it's going to take that original scale of the value of x, which is from 0 to the width, and say, make that now on a scale of 0 to 255, which is the full range of color. So now when we play this, we're going to see it do a really nice sort of transition going across the screen. So map is one of those things that's super powerful for changing our elements. Now if we use something like random and we give it a random 255 and we give it a fill of random, what's going to happen is this is going to constantly be like really flashing because it is taking into account this constant change as it's flipping through. So what we might want to do is, we've got a couple options. One is to change the frame rate, to slow it down. And normally it's at a frame rate of 60 seconds, but if we slowed it down to 10, we'll see a much slower rate of change in how this moves, but it also changes our overall sort of movement. We could also change it to 1, so there's only 1 frame per second. So this one's kind of interesting for just getting that really blocky sort of feel. But this is some of the basic ideas of working with shapes moving across the canvas and starting with the draw loop.